All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. This is a very special occasion to mark the opening of the Minderoo-UWA Deep Sea Research Centre. My name's Tony Warby. I'm the Chief Executive of the Flourishing Oceans program at Minderoo Foundation, and I'll be your MC for the next little while. There's a number of people here today who I'd particularly like to acknowledge. The Honourable Alana McTiernan, MLC, Minister for Regional Development, Agriculture and Food, Hydrogen and Industry. Alana has let us know she's running a few minutes late, so she will be here and sneak in the side. Madeline King, MP and Member for Brand. Josh Wilson, MP, Member for Fremantle. Professor Amit Chakma, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Western Australia. Dr. Andrew Forrest and Nicola Forrest, co-chairs of the Minderoo Foundation. Robin Collard, a traditional owner and elder of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. Distinguished guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, a very, very warm welcome to everyone, and also to the people who are joining us online. We are live streaming the launch right now and also recording the launch, and it's great to have a significant number of people from around the country joining us online. As I mentioned, tonight is a very, very proud moment for both Minderoo and UWA. From the Minderoo perspective, our commitment is to solve the biggest challenges facing the world's oceans and to return the oceans to a flourishing state. And we're very keen to support the cutting-edge science that will help us achieve that ambition. And that includes exploring the deepest parts of the world's oceans, which are both poorly understood and hard to access. It's cold, it's deep, it's dark down at the depths of the ocean, but actually that's what makes it attractive to Minderoo. It's part of our DNA to tackle the most difficult challenges and to take calculated risks that advance our knowledge and help to drive step changes in our ability to problem solve. But of course, we don't do it alone. We like to do it with partners who share that ambition, who are prepared to lead and who thrive in a culture of innovation and entrepreneurial spirit. And that brings us to a partnership with the University of Western Australia, and it brings us to this place on the banks of Nurbal Yerrigan, the Swan River, in Whadjuk Noongar country, a stone's throw from Gunnunup, which is a very precious place to Indigenous peoples, and that's also of great significance and the home to Minderoo Foundation. So our organisations and our people are not only connected through our ambition, but geographically along the banks of this beautiful river, and spiritually through Waggle, the ancestral serpent that created that river. And here to welcome us to this incredible land is Robin Collard, a traditional owner and elder of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Robin.
Thank you, Tony. Good evening, my name is Robin Collard, and a Whadjuk Yorga here belonging to this land of Perth, or Boorloo as we know it. As one of many traditional owners and custodians of this land, I'm truly honoured to perform this welcoming to country for you this evening. And I acknowledge with the highest respect Noongar Marman, Ngunis, our men and brothers, Yorgas, Jukan, our women and sisters, Mort, any family who may be here, and of course our Buddias, our leaders that are here this evening, and there are many. Ngala Budja, Ngala Mort, Ngala Cardigan. In our gathering, we remember and acknowledge our ancestors who have walked this land for many thousands of years. I bring my message stick of peace, Borna Wankaning Nija, because this tells my story of who I am in terms of the Wakal, Koya, the frog, my family totem, and the dragonfly, all important for me here on Noongar Whadjuk Budja. Kaya, wanju nono kan kwabarak nyunga nganjur peniya, nono kan dat nyini jenang wangkening. Borlu, Margarap, Karagarap, Durbulirigan, Nija, Walilap, Wajamap, Nija Jalgara, Bil, Nija Karamura, Mandunwa. All of these places, their Noongar names are very special for Noongar people here. I mentioned Perth, Harrison Island with its connection to women and the birthing place, Kings Park, the Swan River, Fremantle, Rottnest Island, the Canning River, the Darling Ranges, and of course, Midland. And here we stand on the banks of the Derbil Yerigan, Nija, Murich-Karigan Maya, at this special place of learning, the home of learning, the University of Western Australia. Nija Jenag Maya Wago, Nija Karigan Wakaning, Wiran Buja Buna Wakaning Balap Court Kart Mindich. Welcome to the sacred ground and the home of the Wakul, the rainbow serpent, the creator of the Noongar dreaming, language, stories and knowledge that all belong to this land. I bring the beautiful eucalyptus leaves that just happen to be flowering right now in this season of Bunuroo, the very first day, and this is what we see. Noongar people bring the eucalyptus leaves because of their medicine and healing qualities when our hearts, minds and bodies are not well. Ngalakni Wankani, we listen to the many stories of this land. Bunuroo Nija, Warakaling Ngaring, Jiriji Bayu, Jiljit Bil Marin, Crab, Carol, what? Kalamaima Wardan, Bil Yerigan, Harbourdunyat, what? This is the season that Noongar people call Bunuroo. It's our second summer. It's the hottest time of the year, which of course means fires everywhere, as there is one today at the foothills of Karamurda or the Darling Ranges. It's a special time too because the Zamia palm is now flowering, that beautiful big cone that emerges from the middle of the palm, and all of that wonderful cotton wool that is natural, that is multiplying at the base of the Zamia palm. Ngalak buja ngani ni jin jin punung wak, buja ngani wak kura. Our land feeds us, it nourishes us. It's not only our land, it's our watering too, the oceans that feed us. Murich court, murich ngat, murich wirin wak. You bring all of your knowledge, your help, for us to learn more. Murich court, murich wirin kaya kor. So we learn from the past, the present, for the future. Kedla kura wingan bunich nija. There's a time when we are humbled and on our knees. Nunok murich wat, but you are strong and solid, just as we are now in this time of COVID. Kwap wiran kulin, babinga waranka, nunok court yakai king. Be kind and thoughtful to one another and make friends on your journey in Wajak Nyunga Buja. So sing from your heart and celebrate this wonderful occasion this evening as we celebrate the launch of the Minderoo-UWA Deep Sea Research Centre, Wadarin, Wagata, Ngala, Kibera, searching the ocean on our ships. Kaya, Yunka. Thank you.
Wadaran, Wagata, Nala, Kibera, searching the oceans with our ships. And Robin and I were discussing that before the start of proceedings today and thought that that would look just splendid on a plaque up outside of Alan's office. So we'll make sure that we make that happen. Thank you, Robin. That was a really warm and generous welcome to country. Thank you. I'd now like to welcome Professor Amit Chakma, the Vice-Chancellor of the University, to make a welcome address. Amit.
Thank you very much, Thank you, Robin, for your welcome to the country and your inspiring reflection of the land that we are situated on. Goes without saying, our beautiful campus of the University of Western Australia is situated on the traditional land of the Noongar people, and I acknowledge that, how privileged we are to continue the learning tradition that we inherited from our Noongar owners, and we continue to this date. Let me welcome you all. Kaya Wangju, and welcome. Particularly delighted to see so many of you, including our distinguished guest. Let me just acknowledge the Honorable Ilana McTiernan, who is not here yet, but she's going to come. She's here? There you are. Minister of many things. Certainly, all portfolios are important to us. We have many interactions with the minister. Madeline King, MP, Josh Wilson, MP, and former Governor Malcolm McCusker. So I just acknowledge them as examples. How proud I am to be the Vice Chancellor of this university that has educated so many of our leaders, and there are many more who are in the audience. So welcome home. Well, I also welcome you to the home of our Oceans Institute. So Oceans Institute is an institute that I put together nearly a decade ago that brings today's day about 200 plus scholars to focus on oceans. Oceans is a priority area for this university. You can understand why. And they do wonderful research. They make important contributions. And that places this universities in various rankings. In the area of oceanography, we are ranked 21st in the world. In art and marine sciences, 37. So a lot of good work is going on, but our ambitions are high. And what we have done so far at this university and many others simply would not have been possible without strong partnerships, including strong philanthropy that we have benefited from since our founding. And that tradition continues. So we're delighted to be the partner with Minderoo Foundation. What a privilege it is to have a foundation that focuses on fundamental knowledge, fundamental science. Like us, Minderoo has great aspiration. They think on grand scale in order to tackle grand challenges. Like us, it strives to serve locally, nationally, internationally by looking to lead the world, not simply to follow it. So Minderoo and UWA, we are kindred spirit, very good partners in advancing knowledge. It is important to all of us and to our humanity. So we aim to break through the borders of knowledge and create new paths. We believe in seeking wisdom. That is the motto of this university. And as our great partner has another motto equivalent, challenging the impossible. So the partnership is synergistic. With all the great things a university does, like ours, we also have some challenges. By design, by history, we tend to be conservative in our approaches. What Minderoo brings to that partnership is taking us away from our conservatism and actually doing things that we alone would not be able to do. I'm profoundly grateful to Andrew Forrest, Dr. Forrest, and of course, Nicola and Minderoo Foundation for their support of this university. And they support many different things, so I don't have time to list them all, and they would feel embarrassed if I do. But let me say that your support has been transformational for the university. I knew that before coming on, and I now know it firsthand experience. So the most important thing the foundation does, and the Forest do for us, is support our scholars of different kind. And The best example, shining example of that is Forest Research Foundation, Forest Hall. I had the privilege of living in that hall for about 6 weeks and had the opportunity to interact with bright young scholars from all over the world who have come and gotten to know some of them. And some of them have graduated and are going to do wonderful things in other places. So I was suggesting to Andrew, of all the great things that they have done, they will do, in my biased opinion, this would be one of the greatest. And I know Malcolm McCusker is sitting there, I said the same thing, because these sort of things, they are going to contribute in perpetuity. So let me not prolong this anymore, except to say that we are excited. With the support of Minderoo, again supporting that scholars, we have been able to attract a top-notch scientist, top scholar, who will speak to us a little bit later. And without that support, I know, anybody who is involved knows that that would not be possible. So by bringing in, supporting scholars, we're going to advance knowledge for the benefit of all of us. So thank you very much for joining us. And I know that Andrew will be introduced formally later, and he will open the center. It will be named the Minderoo-UWA Deep Sea Research Center. And obviously, upon launch or before launch, the center will discover, will educate, and will inspire us all. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Amit. As Amit has mentioned, it now gives me very great pleasure to introduce the chairman of the Minderoo Foundation, Dr. Andrew Forrest, a very well-known and passionate advocate for the ocean, and as many of you, in fact, I'm sure all of you know, recently completed a PhD in marine ecology here at UWA. He's particularly passionate about the Indian Ocean. It's on our doorstep. And that includes the deep canyons that are so ecologically significant and that formed a significant part of the focus of his PhD. So today we are really delivering on his vision to establish this centre, and I'd like to invite you, Andrew, to tell us more about that vision and to officially launch the Minderoo-UWA Deep Sea Research Centre. Thanks.
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us, Minister McTiernan. Great to have you here. Haven't seen you for a little while. Members of Parliament, Professor Jamieson, Professor Chapman, Mrs. Jamieson, huge welcome. Nicola, thank you for your unending support. So, we know so much about our shallow waters, all that we can see, of course, with the naked eye, down to 200 metres. Getting down to 2,000 metres, we know so much less. Getting down below 6,000 metres, if you look at a Stephen Hawking space and time model, you're going to know so much more about outer space in terms of pure number of facts than you know about the deep sea ocean. It is the least explored biosphere in our little planet, and it could well be the most important. It's certainly the sink for so much of our carbon. We are reliant upon it for the upwellings of our oceans to generate and to expel the enormous amount of oxygen that we breathe. Without the oceans, we die. Simple. Keeping them healthy is a matter of knowledge because its health relies upon the mercy of its greatest predator, humankind. That predation is not necessarily just eating it, it eats its life. That predation is really deep pollution, industrial overfishing, and a new threat which has emerged, which is upon us immediately, and that's unregulated, poorly managed, next to no environmental science, next to no ecological determination of significance, and that's deep sea mining. course, I am a miner, and as Minister McTiernan can vouch for, throughout my career building major projects here, we've jumped through environmental and approval hoops which collectively have taken decades, and that is correct. We need to be sure the environment we leave behind is at least as wonderful as the environment we started with, that we simply remove the worthless heavy metals which can support no life and put the soils back and the water channels and the life even more vibrant than it was. We do not know that with deep sea mining. The Seabed Authority has already issued 3 licenses. And I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that the plunder of our oceans through industrial overfishing is happening because the human consciousness is not tested, because we don't have the knowledge. It's not difficult to mourn. The tears of strangers are no more than salt water. The loss of massive ecosystems and life, because we didn't know it existed in the first place. But the collective human conscience, I do have faith in. We will not simply drive our car of life over a cliff if we know there is a cliff edge. The great work of oceanomics to determine DNA in the very high quality DNA sample you can gather from extraction of whole cells from the entire ocean column will start to reveal the life of the oceans. And this, combined with Professor Jamieson's work, one of the true great pioneers of the hadal zone, below 6,000 metres, where we know 58% of species are endemic, only found there. And that's just the beginning of our discoveries, because we haven't even scratched the surface of the moon in our explorations of the oceans. We know, though, in that tiny scratch of the moon, that chemicals from plastics are found in concentration 50 times more potent and lethal in the crustacea, in the arthropods of the deep sea, than are found in the most polluted waterways of China. We only know this because of that deep sea exploration. I am calling on fundamental research to allow us, as a collective human conscience, to understand what is in our deep sea before it is destroyed. There are fish people from Norway who are already looking at plundering these depths. Extractive governments without any regulation to plunder their surfaces. I feel, ladies and gentlemen, as we here stand before you with an ability to research the world's least understood ocean, your Indian Ocean, that we have a collective responsibility to certainly cheer on Professor Jamieson, to ensure that this centre, what we can, I think, all be proud of, the Minderoo-UWA Deep Sea Research Centre, is something which you were here to share today, and in the years and decades to come, we'll be terrifically proud that together, through fundamental science, through taking the risk which only deep research into the unknown can deliver the rewards from, will give us information which can help save our oceans, which by very definition will help save humankind. Thank you. So, without those sombre thoughts, can I cast your mind to joy? I hereby declare open the Minderoo-UWA Deep Sea Research Centre on behalf of Nicola and I. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. As powerful and inspirational as ever, and we're very, very grateful for your support and for your support, Nicola and Alan. No pressure, but you've got a big job ahead of you. Ladies and gentlemen, I did mention at the start of proceedings that we like to partner with the best and brightest from wherever we can, anywhere in the world, and there simply is no better person that UWA could have recruited to lead this centre than Professor Alan Jamieson. If I can embarrass him just a little bit, he's worked in deep sea research for over 20 years. He's had a profound impact on that field, as Andrew has just said. He's among only a small handful of researchers who've been able to conduct research as deep as the hadal zone, which is below 6 kilometres deep. He's published over 80 scientific papers, been involved in more than 50 deep sea expeditions, and stayed married through that, amazing, covering every ocean basin in the world. And his work has been featured in the BBC's Blue Planet series and NHK's Deep Ocean and Descent into the Mariana Trench documentaries. Alan has moved from the UK with his family to take up this position as inaugural director. His presentation today is titled Beyond the Abyss, Life in the Deepest Oceans, but I understand he might also share what he calls a very strange story about a chance meeting with a billionaire philanthropist in London some years ago that has ultimately led to him being here today. Alan.
Thank you everybody for turning up. So yes, we have a strange story. So where did the Minderoo and UWA partnership start? It was a couple of years ago. Myself and a colleague had just flown in from the Kingdom of Tonga into London, carrying $2.5 million worth of Omega watches in our hand luggage. That in itself is a whole different story, but flying from Tonga to London is awesome for jet lag. And we were there to do something else, and my colleague called me the next morning and said, look, I'm going to go speak to this guy. I think you should come with me. I was like, oh, okay, whatever, yeah, what are you trying to do? So we went to Piccadilly, I think it was, and we met this Australian guy. I was like, oh, he's kind of interesting. And my colleague was trying to sell him something that cost $50 million. I think it's fair to say that wasn't going anywhere, that conversation. But we started talking and what we're doing, and at the time I had just finished nearly close to finishing an expedition that took us around the world, 42,000 miles, and to dive the deepest place in every ocean, and we'd done loads of science, and it was great. And I just happened to mention the fact that we did the whole thing with a science budget of $0. And we spoke for a while, and just before we got to the elevator, Andrew turned around and said, don't worry, I'll fund it, and then pushed us into the elevator, and off we went. And we're like, what did he just say? I think that might have been a big deal. Who is this guy? And then a couple of months later, I ended up landing in Perth, which is also awesome for jet lag, 3-day trip to Perth from the UK. And I didn't know what to do because there was nobody around. So I sat in a bar and I thought to myself, who do I know who lives in Australia? And this is a long shot, right? Who do I know that lives in Australia? So I remember Julian Partridge lived in Australia. So I texted him and said, are you in Australia? And he texted back and said, yes. I said, what city do you live in? And he said, Perth. I said, wow, that's not bad. He says, where are you? I says, I'm in Perth. I go, great. He said, no, where are you? I said, I'm in this really weird little shopping centre called Broadway Fair. And Julian says, I'll be there in 5 minutes. And that's pretty much where it all started, was that visit of when Julian turns up and says, so what are you here for? And I says, well, I've met this guy, his name's Andrew Forrest, I don't know if you've heard of him. Julian was like, yeah, he's probably the most recognisable figure in West Australia. So yeah, we know who he is, yeah. And that's where it started. So here we are, and thank you everybody for coming. So I thought what I'll do is just give you a brief overview of the types of work we do and the types of work we've done. It's hard to know what we've done and where we're going starts and ends. It's one big, huge locomotive at the moment. And I'll start with my one and only graph. I think it's far too late today to be talking graphs, but this is an important graph. So this is a graph of the percentage of the Earth from the highest point of Mount Everest to the deepest point of the Mariana Trench, and the red line that shows the difference between above and below the waterline. Basically, we all know that the oceans cover most of the planet. What we're not so familiar with is the concept of deep sea. Deep sea tends to refer to anything deeper than 200 meters, which in my opinion is utterly ridiculous. I mean, look at it. 200 meters means nothing. This is like saying 200 meters into the Amazon rainforest is all we care about. Everything after that we just ignore because it's deep forest and it's full of monsters. So the interesting bit for me is that when you take the percent of the Earth between 4,000 and 6,000 meters deep, you've already got 54% of the planet sat there. Right? So most of the planet is what we call abyssal plain. It's the big, huge slabs of tectonic plates that people never go to, people never talk about, and people don't seem to care very much about. The last bit is what we call the hadal zone, but it's 6,000 to 11,000 meters. And these big, deep bits are basically where two tectonic plates hit each other and one gets subducted underneath the other one. So it creates these really big, deep trenches. And that accounts for 45% of the total depth range. So you're talking about the largest, single largest habitat on the planet, and a habitat which adds up to about half the total depth range. So terminology-wise, we're calling it bathyal, abyssal, and hadal, not hadal, just because lots of people say that. Anyway, so that's the terminology, that's what we're talking about today. So the reason why, one of the main drivers of my research is to try and blur that line between ocean and deep ocean. I think that's a very destructive line. It's an imaginary line that's been drawn in the sand that someone says, above this line we should care, below that line is an environment that somebody else probably does. Some scientist in Perth probably likes that bit. But it's just one big huge body of water from top to bottom. There isn't really a sea and a deep sea. And I don't think we're in a position anymore that we can hide behind technical challenges. Historically, there's always been a case of deep sea is for the super wealthy, and there's only a few laboratories in America who may have subs, and even, it's actually not that expensive, and there's no reason why we can't treat it as a whole. There's no reason why we have to remain shallow. So we specialize in abyssal and hadal, and the abyssal story is one of just huge, almost unfathomable distances. And this is where you become almost this sort of the astrophysics of marine biology. When you're dealing with numbers where it's hard to comprehend, when you think about how big the Pacific Ocean is, how much of that is deep sea, you can't even get your head around how big that is. You can't see it. And I think as human beings, we're much more comfortable with things that we can see and try and understand in terms of scale. Where some of the numbers are just huge. When you look at the cubic kilometers of water in the ocean, it just becomes something else. The hadal story is one of great depth. It's one of really, really extreme environments. And wherever you get these big deep trenches, they're isolated from one another. So you have something quite unique in that this is my new favorite projection of the world. It's called Spillhouse. It's brilliant. It makes Argentina look awesome as well. But when you look at that, all this space there, all of that is abyssal plain. That's where most of the planet sits. And then suddenly you're trying to tell yourself, every time you watch TV, they say, well, only 5% of the ocean's ever been explored. You're like, that's pretty good, actually. In the grand scheme of things, when you think how huge this is. So when you look at the blue bits are the really deep bits, the dark blue bits are the even deeper bits. So you've got two stories. How does that whole thing function as one big ecosystem? And if you're a species that's locked into these really deep bits, how are they all connected? How are they all functioning? How is it when we go over here to a trench that, let's say, is off Japan, do we find the same species that lives in a trench off Puerto Rico, but doesn't seem to be capable of moving from one to another? So you're asking really big fundamental questions about the distribution and evolution of life on Earth. So where we're going to start, the Deep Sea Research Centre is something that is going to be, it is already in part working on different scales. So what a thing that a lot of people probably don't really super appreciate is the number of marine parks around WA particularly are actually very, very deep. They're extraordinarily deep. The blue bit around, you can see on there, is 5,000 to 6,000 meters deep, and very little research has ever been done in those. So for that, that's job number one, is get in there. And what we're going to do is contextualize the marine parks against what happens in the rest of the Australian EEZ, because that's also important. And also, bizarrely, there hasn't really been a lot of work done off the coast there. And take all that, and what does that mean in terms of how does that sit contextually with the entire Indian Ocean? And the Indian Ocean becomes a problem because of all the 5 oceans. That one seems to have been left behind for all sorts of reasons. But the polar regions were very well studied, North Atlantic particularly, North Pacific and so on. But Indian Ocean's a little bit left behind. So there's a lot of work to be done on that scale. But then that only makes sense if you put the Indian Ocean and all the subparts of that into a global ocean study. And I think we're now at that age in an era where there's no excuse for not doing global studies. 10 years ago, I would have said there's no chance we could have done what we did in the last 3 years, but we're already doing that. We're on this really steep trajectory. So it's all relevant and it's all It all depends on each one. So that global study, just in the last 15 years of when I got into some really super mega deep stuff, which is the technical term for it, I've managed to collect samples and CDT data and maps, and we've done 500 lander deployments from all these different locations. And actually, when I was looking at this earlier, it looks like I've been subconsciously making a pincer maneuver on Australia anyway. So maybe it was already going to happen. But yes, we have lots and lots and lots of sites and huge amounts of data. All that data, all those samples are actually in this building now. So we're not coming in on this brand new. We're building upon already a lot of work which has been contributed to by a lot of people. So to give you an idea of the types of things we see and the types of things we do, I've got a little video here. So video's in two parts. First part is what we call landers. This is how we get our data. They're freefall camera systems that crash land on the seafloor, attract mobile animals to them. Things like this thing here, it's called the grenadier or the rat tail, probably one of the most geographically widespread animals on the planet. Never gets a look in a blue planet because it's not particularly charismatic. We have these big prawns. You think big prawns, that's a shallow water animal. Nah, that big prawn is at 7,700 meters deep, and they're big. Here's another one there. This one's from off WA. This is one about 5,000 meters deep. And the more you look, the more eyes on the ground you get, the more deployments you do, the more subdives you do, the more animals you discover. You realize that pretty much most major animal groups are present in very deep depth. For example, these big husky-eels here, has anyone ever seen one of these fish before? Probably not. They're probably sitting on about 60% of planet Earth, and they never get a look in because they're always a little bit too far offshore, a little bit too deep. I mean, they're not the smartest fish in the sea, to be fair, but you know, they do seem to be ecologically significant. This is the deepest fish in the world. We discovered this about 6 or 7 years ago. It's a snailfish. This goes down to 8,200 meters in the Mariana. Every one of the big trenches has its own species of snailfish. They're very gelatinous. And this is a super giant for the guys who were upstairs earlier looking at one of these in the jar. Here's one alive. These are just enormous. They're called super giants because they are the versions of those little things buzzing around. Hence, super giant probably doesn't even do it justice. And then you have the usual, we have arguments in the deep sea as well. And then you have these really cool surprises. This happens quite a lot when you go to the depths that we go to. For example, here, this is a lander. It's a lander that's not supposed to move. It slid down a hill and discovered an extinct hydrothermal vent 3 times deeper than it's supposed to be on the wrong side of a subduction zone in the Mariana Trench. You're like, okay, go figure that one out. So great little things like that. On here, for example, this is close to the deepest point in Antarctica. This is the South Sandwich Trench. Sitting there, that lander came down on a volcanic elastic flow of an old volcano. Thinking that's interesting. The cameras were on for just 6 hours. This is the only sub-zero hadal zone in the world in terms of temperature. And within 2 days, we had 4 new species of fish. It's as simple as that. Closer to home, these are the big basketwork eels that live off Australia and New Zealand. Quite aggressive. This is quite shallow. This is probably up to about 1,000 meters. And on the way back earlier this year, we stopped at the top of the Perth Canyon, managed to finally find an animal which is strong enough to move the lander. That's the deepest jellyfish in the world. Doesn't look particularly surprising. It's 10,000 meters deep. This is one of the ones which I love because every now and again you get thrown a complete curveball. This is at 7,000 meters deep. It's a tunicate, which is a kind of sea squirt. It's completely transparent. It's stocked, so it's normally suspended off the seafloor. For reasons we don't understand, it's come loose and was gracious enough to give us a beautiful little flyby. It's a 1 in a million shot. We'd never get that. It also has a juvenile hanging off its stock, which I just think is a beautiful bit of footage. This is also Indian Ocean, and this is why the Indian Ocean is amazing. Put the camera down one day, cephalopods, whether it be squid, octopus, cuttlefish, or whatever, are not supposed to be here. Put the camera down, Dumbo octopus, 6,000 meters. Put it back down the next day, Dumbo octopus, 7,000 meters. And then we came back early last year and found squid at hadal depth as well. That's a CG model of an amphipod. We talk about amphipods a lot. That's why we had to CG it, because they don't behave in front of the camera, because that's what they normally do. We use these a lot for things like pollutants, anthropogenic contaminants, for microplastics, for genetics. They're an amazing animal to work with because we can pick them up in big numbers, pick them up in sort of large, diverse groups, and so on. But they are an amazing component of the entire food web of this planet. And when you get down deep, they really show you how good they are. This is 2 macro carcasses over 6 hours. at 8,000 meters in Atacama Trench. Just gone. So the second thing we've been doing more recently is playing around with submarines. I say playing around, that makes it sound like it, but yeah, it's more serious than that. It's really technical and stuff, nautical. This is a submersible called Limiting Factor, which we've been using for, let's say, 3 years, and I've been lucky enough to be able to dive in it about 13 times now. To personally the Pacific and Atlantic and Indian Ocean quite a few times, and the Red Sea and stuff like that. It's really good fun. It's two of us sitting in a titanium ball, and the dives take about 12 hours from end to end. And you sink to the bottom, and you have an amazing perspective on what you're looking at when you can see it yourself. You're not looking at animals on a video or a still photograph. You're looking at them with your naked eye. And you can maneuver this vehicle around complex topography that you can't do with things like landers or trawling. This is the deepest place in the Indian Ocean. This is just south of Bali. It's 7,300 meters deep. You see these incredibly complicated rock formations, and in amongst it you see all these orange and blues and yellows and white. They're bacterial mats. That's first put us onto this whole concept that the bottom of these trenches are probably chemosynthetic. When you start thinking about the extreme life forms on planet Earth, you're looking at bacterial mats at the bottom of the ocean. That's immediately recognizable as the deepest place in the world because it's covered in discarded fiber optic cable. That's the Challenger Deep. Unfortunately, Challenger Deep is almost completely ruined now with discarded cables. And two things to notice here. The habitat type is very, very flat, very, very soft sediment. It's kind of what people expect. I think it's really, really boring, but it's populated by these beautiful anemones. You see them here, they look almost like flowers. They're called the Galathyanthemums, and they're living under a pressure of 1.1 tons per square centimeter. And they just look like roses that are just floating in the wind. You know, they're just really, really stunning. And then you find right next to it, there's a sulfur mound. You know, a big, huge chunk of sulfur being squeezed out of tectonic plate at 11,000 meters underwater. It's just like, this is absolutely awesome. We recently did a survey along Challenger Deep, and we found that sulfur seems to be something that's happening all the way along the trench. And just as you come off it again, you're looking at the habitat type, the variation and stuff, and the rules of engagement are the same. Suddenly you move away and things can change quite differently, the same ways they do in shallow water. For example, this is a North Australian basin, 4,800 meters, very little going on. Suddenly come across a rock. On that one rock, there's like one of everything on it. There's just everything. There's even sea spiders down there, and there's sponges and anemones and so on and so on. It's just absolutely stunning, beautiful. And again, off Australia, there's these wonderful, they're actually sponges. They look really artificial, but they're very, very fragile. One of the things I liked was the Wallaby Couvert Escarpment, which is off WA as well. You have these areas of just really crazy, crazy geology, and the only thing living on them are these unbelievably delicate glass sponges, stock sponges, just hanging on there. But the big find, certainly from East Indian Ocean, was the manganese nodule fields of the Wallaby Zenith Fracture Zone. Each one of those manganese nodules has taken 8 million years to form. And the density of these things was just incredible. It was just billions and billions and billions of these things. You can almost feel how they've rolled down the hill over the last few million years. And on those things, there were all sorts of things living there. You know, we spent a good month there, and I'll show you what we found there at the very end. So, the deep sea, the really deep parts of the ocean are not something which is out of sight, out of mind. It's not something which is easily predictable. It's not something which is all boring old flat mud and seafloor. It's complicated, it's interesting, and it's every bit as fragile as other parts of the oceans. So, the deep sea centre itself, bit of a detail about what it is we're trying to do. There's obviously myself as the director, and we've got Todd, who's over there somewhere, who's hiding. He is our ecologist. Look at all things ecology and biology. We have Paige Maroney, who's also here somewhere. She's going to be working on the genetics because that's becoming a huge part of what we do. Plus we have Prema, who's here too as well. She's an interesting one in that we realised that the way in which deep sea is being communicated to the wider audience isn't really working. So we've decided we've employed someone in the humanities to see if we could do something about the way in which that information is taken across. We also have a new guy called Jakob, who is very mysteriously just a silhouette here because he's still a work in progress. If he's online right now, I'll be in touch. Technology-wise, we're building 3 landers. Those landers will be rated to 11,000 meters, and they will be designed, or they have been designed, to go on Andrew and Nicola's vessel, the Pangaea Ocean Explorer, and they'll be going there hopefully in March. And our very first dive of those landers, I think we're just going to go straight for the deep end. There's no point, right? We're going to go straight for the 6,500 meters, Diamantina fracture zone. And they have beta cameras, they have funnel traps, they have a whole bunch of hydrographic sensors and water samples and so on. So they will be ready by the end of February, ready to go to sea mid-March. So, and I just want to give you a couple of examples of the types of work we've been doing recently, just in the last 12 months, since I signed the contract for here. And we did 3 expeditions. The first one was the Philippine Trench. We did 2 dives to 10,000 meters, which I was lucky enough to be on one of those. One of the sad things about that particular dive was the ratio between plastic bags to animals was 9-1. And we managed to actually finally get the whole life history of a plastic bag, from it floating mid-water to reaching the seafloor, to eroding all the tracks and burrows on the seafloor, to eventually being buried. That's how many there were. You could actually see its whole life history, which is really sad, but it is what it is. And we also found the deepest shipwreck in the world, the USS Johnson, DD-557. You can see it up there, which is a very humbling, very sobering experience, seeing something like that lying on the bottom of the sea. It was really not particularly nice, I would have said, at all. It was a very difficult thing to kind of get your head around. But what was interesting is the way in which it landed on the seafloor. It skidded down the trench by several hundred meters before it came to a standstill. And the thing that struck me when I was looking at the videos back is that scar on which it created in the bottom looked like it happened yesterday. And it's a World War II destroyer. It happened 77 years ago. So when you start thinking about deep sea mining and this whole idea about big mechanical harvesters are going to tear up the seafloor, and everyone, I guess the idea is eventually the seafloor settles back down to what is, some sort of restored state. It's going to take centuries, because this is such a slow moving environment that this stuff is not going back. There wasn't a single animal in any of the tracks. Even the Holothurians hadn't moved into this track yet after 77 years. It's so slow. But to cheer us up in the end, we also found the deepest squid in the world. It put an extra 1,500 meters on all squid, so that was good. The Mariana Trench, we went in there and we looked and we mapped the sulfur mounds, and we managed to retrieve a sample of the sulfur mound, which is one of the most prized samples we have upstairs at the moment, because that's going to tell us quite a lot of information about what's going on there. But the big one was what we called Expedition Indomitable. We had to call it Indomitable because that's the old name for the ship. And of the 70 odd expeditions I've done in my career, this was by far the most difficult one to pull off. In part because we decided to do it very short notice during a pandemic, and it involved Australian Border Force. So it became really complicated, really difficult, but it was totally worth it. It was brilliant. We did 14 submersible dives. This was the charter was paid for by Minderoo as well. And we did 14 submersible dives, 25 land deployments. We mapped a huge chunk of East Indian Ocean, and it was wonderful. It was worth the heartache trying to get that thing down from Guam. I could talk all day about the complications in the paperwork we had to do to get that ship near Australia. Oof. Anyway, it is where it is. So that's where we're at just now. So the grand plan for the Indian Ocean is, these are the sites we've already done, thanks to the Minderoo charter on the pressure drop. These are the sites that we plan to do on Pangaea within the next 2 months. These are the sites we've already got done from the last 2 years. And these are the sites we're currently put in, we've got grant proposals in, or we're currently writing. So we're trying to make that move to try and get deeper and further offshore in the Indian Ocean. But this bottom line, I'll end with this. This is just a collection of species that we found. If you were standing on Cottesloe Beach and decided to just start walking, avoid the shark net, but imagine you just kept walking for 200 miles. This is the stuff you'll come across. This is all from at least 1,000 meters to 6,500 meters off Australia. And this is the place that the potentially, mining sites. This is a place where we're polluting. This is a place where plastics are going into, plastic bags are going into. And there's everything here. There's sea stars, there's brittle stars, there's galatheid crabs, there's sponges, there's holothurians, absolutely everything. It's teeming with it. It's wonderful. And that's not all, there's more. There's all these fish and crabs and crustaceans and urchins and everything else. And this was all taken in what amounted to about 2 weeks worth of science. That's all it took to get this from having known nothing about that area. And this is still only a fraction of it. And there's more, right? So on this side is the top of the extinct volcanoes at the bottom of the fracture zone. You have this crazy diversity of all these stock sponges, really super fragile things sat on the top of a volcano. It's mind-blowing. On this side, you see the manganese nodule field, and this is probably one of the most sobering pictures I've ever taken. is this one, where you have everything on the seafloor you don't want to be taken out underneath something on the seafloor that we should never put in the first place. You've got a plastic bottle sitting on a mangrove, and that sums it all up right now. It's that. But this picture here in the middle through the viewport, that's probably the most densest mangrove nodule fields I've ever seen. I took that with my iPhone. It was just such an amazing place to be. And that's not part of the thing. All right, we can end there if you want. Yeah, so anyway, so yes, lots and lots of amazing biodiversity in the Indian Ocean and off WA, and our job is to go out there, chart it, work out why it's there, what it's connected to, and how could we stop making it worse. Because the situation right now, as I say, to find so many plastic bags at 10,000 metres is actually really quite a sobering thing, especially when they're eco-friendly ones as well. It's just bizarre to see that at those kind of depths. So anyway, I'll thank everybody again for turning up, and thank Tony for emceeing tonight, and obviously Andrew and Nicola as well, and everyone in the new Deep Sea Centre. Happy days. And thank you very much.
So Alan just talked a little bit about a lot of the complexity of getting the pressure drop voyage happening. But there was one part of that that was incredibly straightforward, which was Alan dropping me a note saying, I've got this great idea. This ship's available. We could do some cool stuff with it. So we had a good chat about it, and he said, do you think Andrew would be interested? I said, let me check. Anyway, it took all of 48 hours to convince Andrew, and then we got the pressure drop chartered. And having come from a background where you write so many proposals to get ship time, and 10% of the time in 2 years you might get the ship to do half of what you asked for, to have that kind of nimbleness and commitment and energy and passion and willingness to back great ideas, to Amit's point earlier, it means a huge amount to the research community, and we're incredibly grateful to both of you for that support. So we do have a little bit of time for Q&A. If anyone has any questions for Alan, he can jump back to the microphone.
Let me kick it off.
Andrew, can you, so because we've got people online, just speak to the microphone.
This is more of a mechanical question because Alan's very keen to get me in that little titanium ball. There was a shot where we were looking at the lander, and then pressure drop behind it, and it really is just a great big cylindrical ball with very little space for two people, and they're there for at least 12 hours. And I just want to make sure that what we saw when something dropped to the floor, and then the vessel immediately started to rise, that was the weights being released. And that's the only way you get to the surface, is by dropping those weights. And they're mechanical, so simple, or you rely on electrics?
No, just drop the weight and float back.
Yeah. That's what I wanted to know. When you're down that deep, you want it simple.
Any other questions? There's got to be some. Shanta, there's just wait for a microphone to come through.
Thanks, Alan. Why are there so many amphipods down there?
Amphipods are geniuses, I think. They exhibit something called trophic plasticity, which means they're kind of like kids, or the best type of kids, because they'll eat anything. They eat each other. They're horrible cannibals. They'll eat dead jellies. They'll eat absolutely anything at all. So when you're in an environment which is deprived of food because it's so far from the surface, you really can't be fussy. You have to be able to eat whatever it takes. Plus, amphipods have an amazing ability to eat anything and turn it to fat very, very quickly. And that fat allows them to then live much longer periods before they've eaten again. So they're basically just completely adapted to very, very low food environment. Most of the stuff that we find actually has got nothing to do with depth. Most of it's to do with low food or being in the dark. There's not that many things we can explain just by depth. I think it's just because we're human beings and we're just petrified by deep water. But amphipods, it's all about food.
Yeah, thanks. Absolutely amazing stuff. But I just want to ask about this threat to mining that Andrew spoke about, and those nodules that they were magnesium, were they, or
Manganese.
manganese?
Yeah.
I mean, are they part? What is being targeted in the mining world, and does it include those nodules? Are they part of
It's for
what the target is?
electric car batteries. They need cobalt for electric car batteries, and part of one of the major components of the manganese nodule is cobalt. So that's what they need them for. And unfortunately, we're in that stage where there are huge chunks of the North Pacific which have been licensed out, and exploration licenses are all over the place, and they're looking at, well, they already are building huge harvesters to pull them up. But you can't extract them without destroying that particular environment, because that whole environment is based upon these nodules, which have taken 8 million, 10 million years to form. So it just seems incredible that we're at that point.
I mean, it's amazingly ironic, isn't it? We're going into electric batteries to save the Earth, and we're destroying the other part of the planet.
Yeah, it still has to come from, everything has to come from somewhere, right? So it's how you do it that matters.
Thanks, Alan. That was pretty incredible. How do you collect living organisms, selfishly for type specimens, if you're identifying new species and stuff? Can you describe how you actually collect stuff and bring it back?
Yeah, if they're mobile, we just put a bit of mackerel in a tube. It's pretty high-tech stuff. It's apparently it's been used, that technology has been around since ancient Egypt. So we've made them out of Coke bottles before. That's the easy way to do it. If you're an amphipod, amphipods are, as I say, really, really into food, which also makes them really dumb. So they're easy to get. Fish are actually very difficult. Collecting fish is something that you really have to start to think like a particular species of fish. You can't just put a trap down and expect them all to go inside it. You have to design different traps for different species. In terms of all the other stuff, it's all about the sub. You can't do that from landers, and that is all about the manipulator arm. It's got a big robotic arm that can technically pick stuff up. We've had problems with it. It hasn't really worked particularly well, but that's something that's being worked on at the moment. So we should, by the middle of this year, be at a point where we can pick up an animal. So the problem with the sub is it's not a scientific submarine. It was a submarine built to go very, very deep. So it's trying to retrospectively add some more scientific capability to a race car, is what we're trying to do. It's a very good race car, but it's not a Hilux. So. Question here?
Thanks, Alan. I just had a question about the environmental conditions at depth at different sites. Is it quite variable in terms of temperature, salinity from one site to another?
Salinity's, we measure it all the time, and it's unbelievably boring. It just never changes. 34.69. And temperature is a funny one. It changes. Yes, it does change a lot. It's cold. I mean, it's normally between 1.5 and 4 degrees, I guess, depending on when you are. We see a big effect of temperature down in Antarctica because it's the only place where it really actually goes sub-zero, and you find that, to go deep physiologically, you need to be warm. So if you're the warm places, you'll find the same things deeper. If you go to Antarctica, you'll find stuff come up, and you do see that when you look at the stuff we filmed in Antarctica versus even off Chile. There's a big difference there. In terms of currents, it's very, very slow. There are a few places where it's been weirdly high, and one of those was the Java Trench in the Indian Ocean, but generally speaking, it's unbelievably slow. And that is also a bad thing when you think about what we're doing. I don't want to keep preaching about bad stuff that humans are doing in the oceans, but it is one of those things that if when pollutants arrive in somewhere like a trench where it's topographically enclosed and it's not being flushed in any way, it's just basically sitting in this thing very, very slow moving. It just doesn't have a chance to go anywhere. Once it gets into that system, it's only ever going to increase. So even if you stop putting all plastic into the ocean today, everything that you see out there, all that's still going to sink and end up in the deep sea. There's no way around it. It's just going to happen. So the currents aren't really there to move stuff around.
Take threat, and then
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I'm just grabbing.
Nobody really measures it. We've only got information at the moment of oxygen, and oxygen seems to be, they're highly oxygenated all the way to the bottom. The one big outlier, we can get into the real nitty-gritty of science, but whatever we do, the outlier is the Atacama Trench off Chile. And one of the outliers to that is it's very, very low oxygen towards the bottom, which we think is driving everything back up. So we keep thinking we've hit upon a new universal rule of ecology or whatever it is, and then you put the Atacama data in, and it's like, oh, damn it. So yeah, in terms of actual water chemistry, it's not something we've done because most of those types of sensors don't exist for those depths. Yeah.
Thanks, Ellen, and thank you. Congratulations on the appointment. Congratulations, UWA and the Minderoo Foundation as well. I'm interested in how you're going to communicate this to decision makers and what you're going to do. It's very exciting, and you're full of scientists, and it's, if I could be so bold, it's after 6. It's very sexy. It's really exciting. But how do you get it to get that impact in with people like the ministers or decision makers, given that it's almost abstract and it's outside everyone's exclusive zone?
Yeah, that is a big problem. So we're trying to think of ways in which we can be clever about that. I think historically, the last few years, we've had to be very opportunistic and see, just basically bide the right time. So a good example is, for example, just before COVID, we were approached by WWF and an advertising agency in Germany, randomly, and they said, would you name a species after plastic that's found in its gut? And we're like, give me a species about, but it's got plastic in its gut. And they said, do you have one? I said, well, probably. I mean, it's that ubiquitous now. It's like, yeah, I'll go to the cupboard, I'll find a new species, we'll have a look, it's probably got plastic in it. So we did that, and right enough it did. So it was a species from 7,000 meters in Mariana. We gave it to them, we called it Erythrines plasticus, and we gave it to an advertising agency. And this is where science, I think, fails, because they quite often try to do the communication themselves, and it doesn't really work. We went to, or the advertising agency came to us, and we said, look, that's what we've got. We've formally described it. There's the bit of plastic inside it, run with it. And I think it was 1.8 billion people saw that in the first 6 months of the pandemic, because it was just, the timing was brilliant, because everyone was at home just looking at their phones, staring. And it went to 94 countries. I think we've got 120,000 signatures on a petition for it, and it really, and it's, you know, there's a hologram of it now in the Smithsonian, and it cost us nothing. I think we got paid £1,000 for it, which I should have asked for more, but yeah. And it's just the timing of that, and I think that worked because we did something different. You know, just tweeting about it or sticking it on a website, I think these days means nothing at all. I think it's just more shouting into the internet. So we'll try and be smart.
Very entertaining. I think you're a cross between, you know, Billy Connolly and a scientist, and I think that's humour that might capture people's attention, explain things that are complex to the rest of us laymen. So congratulations on your style. Question is, you know, it's ambitious. If you just look at the Indian Ocean and you want to map the bathymetry, you want to identify species and preserve them, and you want to also lobby for preservation. And it's a huge task, ambitious. And someone like Andrew would be a willing partner because he likes things that are very ambitious. But you've got a small group of very talented staff, and we're based here. Do you think you've got the resources you need to accomplish that sort of mission, and over what period of time do you want to achieve this?
I think the honest answer is we have probably enough to be getting on with the work of WA, with Pangea and the marine parks, and hopefully we will be setting up 2 sustained observatories, one in Perth Canyon, one up in Gascoyne. Hopefully we've applied for that. We'll build one at least anyway. So that will mean there will be instrumentations and cameras permanently in the deep water of WA. That's fine. There are other opportunities coming up that would require us to take on a lot more people, let's say. I don't really want any particular details right now, but yeah. We will do, and I think the way that, you know, I know that the way this industry has gone, because when I started doing hadal science, and it was 2007, I did my first lander, and we filmed a fish, and it was like the biggest thing you'd ever thought. We filmed a fish at 7,000 meters. so what now? That was only 10, 13 years ago. And literally no one even knew what the word hadal was, to be honest. And it's just exploded over time. So it is getting bigger and bigger and bigger all the time. I can foresee this lab getting quite significantly bigger very, very quickly, to the point I need to think about how to manage that.
Thanks.
All right, thank you, Alan.
Thanks.
I don't think we've been left in any doubt that you really are the right guy for the job, so congrats and welcome. That's it for formal proceedings. Please join us out in the foyer just behind the doors there for some refreshments. And again, thank you for coming tonight, for committing your time, your energy, support. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you.